So all throughout October, I've been talking about horror comics. Every single day I've released a different video on a different horror comic or horror comic related topic. And my favorite aspect of great horror comics is the art. So today, I'm going to run down a list of my top 10 favorite horror comic artists. Stay tuned and watch this video until the end. All right, we're back. Thank you so much for joining me. Please give the video a thumbs up. Comment down below with your favorite horror comic artists. I don't care if you do a top 10, your first and favorite, your top 25, whatever it is, comment down below, and I love to talk and reply to all comments there. And subscribe if you haven't already, because like I said in the preamble, every day of October I've done a different video on a different horror comic related topic, and I want you to join me for that. If you have missed out, if this is the first time you see my channel, or you just have been late to the game in October, whatever reason, thank you for joining me. But I do have a handy-dandy playlist called Halloween Horrors 2025 that you can go and catch up on all the videos I've released this month. And there's also the playlist for last year's 31 Days of Horror Comics as well. So yes, the other day I did my top 10 favorite horror comics of all time, which was really numbers 20 through 11 because last year I did my top 10, so I've done top 20. But I've never done a list of my favorite artists in any format or any genre on my channel before. It's a list that I struggle with because I love so many of the great artists throughout comic book history. But I figured if I narrow it down to the horror genre, I could probably come up with a top 10 list of my favorites. So here we go. Number 10, this is a countdown, so these are in order. I'm going to start from 10 and go down to 1. Number 10, Martin Morazzo. Martin Morazzo has come onto my radar from the Ice Cream Man series, which I have called the best horror comic of the modern era, of the 21st century. I absolutely love Ice Cream Man, and a lot of it has to do with Martin Morazzo's artwork. He has this like dead line, clean line kind of art style that pulls you into a false sense of security, only to turn that security on its head when it gets to a really creepy or harrowing or gory scene, and that's when he really shines. It kind of reminds me also of Jason Burroughs. I don't know which of the artists is older or what have you, but Jason Burroughs had a similar deadline that pulled you into this false sense of security with the Providence and Neonomicon with Alan Moore. Kind of reminds me a little bit of that. But Martin Morazzo, I just absolutely love his artwork and the coloring, which is done by, I don't know if it's a studio or an artist, but the coloring just really pulls it together as well. I'm a fan of Martin Morazzo, and he only has the opportunity to move up my list as he continues to put out great comics. Number 9, Jack Kirby, the king of comics. Jack Kirby, the GOAT of comics, my all-time favorite artist, no matter the genre. And one of the genres that he doesn't get enough credit for is his work in the horror genre. We talk about Jack Kirby's superhero comics and his sci-fi comics and his romance comics a lot, but his monster comics and horror comics don't get talked about a lot. I did do a video this month on the monster buses, the 2 monster buses that Marvel released, and it was my recent reread of those that really put him on the map for me as a great horror artist. Because one of the things I really appreciate in any sort of comic book art is character design, and Jack Kirby was amazing at that, with no matter the genre. But the fact that he was able to do these 8-page stories, these strips that were one-and-done stories, and come up with new character designs for these kaiju monsters, every time he did a new story, this great character design, like none of them look bad, they all look amazing, and it just such a fun way to do the horror genre, I feel like. So I love Jack Kirby's artwork, no matter the genre, but his horror and his kaiju monsters really, really nailed it for me. Number 8, Shintaro Kago, the Japanese mangaka. I love surreal artwork, and I especially love surreal horror artwork. And Shintaro Kago is really one of the greats at the surreal horror genre. They've been releasing art books from the Mansion Press over in France, I believe, that publisher's from. And then in Japan, he's had a ton of different manga released. And in English, in America, I think we've only had a few series released through Fantagraphics, which I've done videos on both of those. He just has this mind where you're just trying to put together the scope of the imagination that comes from somebody that thinks the way that he does. And you can just see it in his artwork. And it just, like, it sticks with you and makes you think. and tries to like, you're trying to read the message within it. And his storytelling is amazing as well through the manga that I've been able to read in English. He's just a really, really brilliant mangaka and one of the most unique talents in all of comics. Number 7, from EC Comics, we have Ghastly Graham Ingels. Ghastly Graham Ingels is the epitome of amazing horror artists from EC Comics. It's one of the genres they're most famous for, with Tales of the Crypt and Haunt of Fear and Vault of Horror. And Ghastly Graham Ingels, he was given that nickname because his artwork was just that. It was ghastly. It was like dirty and mucky and grimy and slimy, and there's just like all this grit to his artwork. He didn't have the clean line that like a Johnny Craig had. His was like dirty and it just like had this atmosphere to it, and you can like almost smell the scenery that he would draw. And he was so far ahead of his time. There were so many stalwarts of the horror comic book genre that would come later that would be inspired by especially Ghastly Graham Ingels' horror comics for EC, and even inspired guys like Stephen King, who is not an artist, but he's a writer, and he loved those EC comics. R.L. Stine was another one. He inspired him as well, just from the writing standpoint, but it was that kind of imagination that Ghastly Graham Ingels had that would inspire these writers as well. Number 6 is Junji Ito, another Japanese mangaka, probably the master of modern horror, probably the most famous or popular name of modern horror when it comes to comics. Junji Ito is super impressionable for my personal reading because he was the first manga. It was his manga, Uzumaki. That was the first manga I had ever read. And it just opened the floodgates of all the possibilities of other comics I could read from over in Japan. And it was the power of his page turn and storytelling that really got it for me. Like, you think of the great horror movies, they usually have like jump scares that really get your skin crawling. Junji Ito has the same effect with his page turn. Like, he knows how to get it to a point where when you turn that page, like, you see the buildup of everything, and then you finally see that payoff. Just absolutely amazing. He deserves all the praise that he gets for what he does with horror comics. That's Junji Ito. Number 5, I have Mike Mignola, the creator of the Hellboy universe, probably the creator of the largest, most expansive horror universe in all of comic book history. Mike Mignola worked for DC and Marvel a lot in the late 80s. But when the 90s came around, he joined Legendary Comics that had all these massive names, Frank Miller and R. Addams and John Byrne. He was kind of like the smaller, lesser known of the big titans that he was joining with Legendary Comics. But it was through that he debuted Hellboy. And Hellboy just took off and made his career. And he has been able to expand the Hellboy universe into this vast platform where he has amazing character designs. His atmosphere is great. His inspirations have like Jack Kirby and Lovecraft and all this amazing soup of all these things that I love about comic books into his artwork and his storytelling. And it's just so much fun. Like, Mike Mignola has such fun horror comics. I just can't get enough of it. But Mike Mignola is number 5. Number 4, Richard Corben. Richard Corben, I just did a video on him yesterday, showing off all the Richard Corben library from Dark Horse Comics. Check that out. But I still think that he might be the most unique artist in all of comic book history. Every artist, like I just talked about Graham Ingels being an inspiration for artists. Jack Kirby's been an inspiration for a number of artists. Mike Mignola has been an inspiration for a number of artists. And you see that these other artists and cartoonists will mimic these styles of the people that they're inspired by. I don't know that any comic book artist has been able to emulate the ability of Richard Corben to build figures and mold them and model them in the way that he does. His artwork was so ahead of its time that when he was debuting and the color work that he was doing, it looked like digital art. When you look back on it with 2025 eyes and see what he was doing back then, if you're not aware of the timeline, you might think it's just digital art, but that's the way he was so good with color and with line work and things. It's just amazing. And it's like unsettling as well, which is what you want for horror comics anyways. But I just love it. And anytime I get new horror comics from Richard Corben, whether it be in the latest archives of Creepy and Eerie magazine or the latest Richard Corben library edition from Dark Horse, it's just such a treat. And I love to sit down and just read it. Number 3 is Charles Burns. Charles Burns is the artist of my all-time favorite horror comic, which is Black Hole. Absolutely love that story. Talked about it all the time on my channel. But Charles Burns is another surreal horror artist that I absolutely adore. I did a video earlier this month on the surreal horror of Charles Burns. You could check that out and see more of a deep dive into the books that I have of Charles Burns' work and see why I love him so much. But his style is another unique talent where he has this really nice feathering style to his inking that just makes such a unique atmosphere for his characters and the world that they live in. His storytelling is absolutely brilliant. Another great page turn master. But Charles Burns, I will read anything he ever does, and anytime I find a new Charles Burns comic that's new to me that I've never read, it's amazing. It's just such a great day when I do that. But Charles Burns, number 3. Number 2, Ghastly Graham Ingels is an amazing horror artist for EC Comics, but my all-time favorite EC artist, regardless of genre, is Jack Davis. But we're talking about the horror genre, and Jack Davis is my favorite horror artist of the EC bullpen. I love horror comedy. I love all subgenres of horror, too. That's the whole point of my 31 Days of Horror, is to explore the entire genre and subgenre and show the ability of the genre to be this vast, expansive thing. It's not just what scares you or gives you nightmares. It's like, it can be comedy, it can be surreal, it can be science fiction, it can be all these things. Jack Davis has this ability that his artwork has this comedic touch to it, which is why he was so great with Mad Magazine and all the other pinups he did for different sports teams and things later on. But his kind of cartoony art style works so perfectly with the horror comics and horror stories that they're telling at EC that it gives you a false sense of security because it's kind of goofy a little bit and it looks a little bit rounder and different than all the other artists. But his ability to draw monsters as well was just, again, just fun. Like, there's just so much fun you have when you're reading a Jack Davis horror comic, and I can't get enough of it. Number 1, of all the horror comics and horror artists I've ever read in my life, the guy that continues to climb up my rankings of all-time favorite comic book artists, regardless of genre, and the guy that anytime his name appears on a comic book, I get excited that I'm going to read it for the first time. Over the last few years, I've been reading more and more of his work, and I just can't get enough of it, is Bernie Wrightson. Bernie Wrightson is probably most famous for 2 things. Probably co-creating Swamp Thing, which is with Lin Wein, which is a huge deal. One of the great comic book characters of all time. And then his Frankenstein artwork. His Frankenstein artwork, in my opinion, is like the greatest artwork any comic book artist ever put together on a paper. And he would draw this as massive size, and he would work on modeling things to get the perfect lighting, and he'd work on these pages for weeks and weeks and weeks. It wasn't a job where you had to meet a deadline and every week you had to get a certain number of pages done. This was a true work of love. Bernie Wrightson had a passion for doing this Frankenstein artwork, and he wasn't really thinking about the money that he would gain from it. He wanted to just do it just to, fulfill his own desires. And it's amazing. If you've never seen it before, I'm pulling up some artwork here and you're going to see it, but just look up Bernie Wrightson Frankenstein and you'll be blown away. But it wasn't just that. His Swamp Thing run with Lin Wein is mind-bogglingly good. Like, it's just such fun, great monster comics. The Absolute Edition they just put out a few years ago, I have a video on that, mind-blowing as well. And then all his work with Creepy and Eerie magazine. Every time I get to a new issue of those as I'm reading them and I see Bernie Wrightson's name on it, it's just amazing work. A Web of Horror, he was in that book as well that I did a review on earlier this month, and his artwork in there blew me away. He does some of his early career stuff. He's just amazing. Creep Show is another comic that he did based on the movie that Stephen King wrote that George A. Romero directed, and then Bernie Wrightson does the artwork for it. Like, he's working with titans at that point of the horror genre. And you could tell through Bernie Wrightson that his artwork was definitely influenced heavily by Graham Ingels. Bernie Wrightson grew up on those EC comics, so he was perfect to go into the black and white mags of Creepy and Eerie, which were trying to recapture that love and passion of the horror genre that EC had a decade plus before. Bernie Wrightson, though, a true titan of the industry, a true titan of the industry, one of the all-time great comic book artists. I can't get enough of him. That's the list. My top 10 favorite horror comic artists. Now, I want to hear from you. I want to know what your favorite artists are of the horror genre. maybe I left someone out. Maybe I haven't read enough comics by a certain artist that I need to, and you need to put them on my radar. Put those down in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't already, because you don't want to miss out on the rest of my 31 days of horror comics. The month's still long. We still have plenty of days to talk about those. And give the video a thumbs up. All those things help out the YouTube algorithm and puts my channel in front of comic book fans' eyeballs that might not know my channel exists. Doesn't cost you a dime, just a little bit of your time. Thank you guys. Keep talking comics.